Welcome, guys, to UFC Fight Night. Lopes versus Silva back again after a really successful week last week. Went 10 for 13 on picks, perfect prelims. Should be a fun fight night in San Antonio. Let's get right into it. All right, starting off at welterweight, this is the Ultimate Fighter finale. This was originally scheduled for the last pay per view. Uh, was 319, I believe. Got postponed due to Centenando injury, but we do have it on this card. We got Rodrigo Centenando versus Daniil Donchenko. Daniil opened it as a pretty sizable favorite, mainly due to the danger factor, right? Rodrigo, if you've watched his regional tape and even his Ultimate Fighter tape, not the most exciting guy in the world, but he will still get after it. Decent boxing, mainly just a boxer on the feet, doesn't really kick as much. The grappling is where he wants to be, though. He's got nice takedowns, good top game and control. But yeah, that is his main goal to be, on the clinch, against the cage, and on the ground. He does have that finishing ability once it gets to the ground. Take it on Daniil Danchenko. Very dangerous in his own right. You see, all the comparisons. Oh, it's Yuri Prohashka. He's got the hair. He's like Yuri Prohashka. He's like Robert Valentin, and he kind of fights similarly, right? He's a very dangerous guy, unorthodox strikes on the feet, also dangerous in the ground with submissions, has a couple anacondas in his career. But yeah, that is where he wants to be, is mainly in the striking. I think Centenardo's going to offer him that fight, right? As I said before, this guy's a bit of a brawling type of fighter. Likes to use the boxing, getting close, and I think that's going to really benefit to Donchenko here because he is going to have a power advantage, especially early in this fight. I think he's going to have a major danger advantage in this fight. Even on the ground, if Centenado once it takes it there, I think Donchenko can out scramble Cinzanando, and like I said, on the feet, it should be all Donchenko once it gets up and close. So, due to the power advantage, I like Donchenko in this fight. Odds a little bit wide in my opinion, but I think this and fight does not go the distance. I think fight does not go the distance is a pretty safe bet. I believe it is, minus money right now, but I like that bet mainly because of Donchenko's power and his, ability to kind of gas out sometimes later. It looks better recently in the house, but I still do think that is somewhat of a factor coming into his first UFC fight. All right, next fight up at Benaway, another new prospect. We got 19-year-old Alice Pereira versus Montserrat Rendon. Pereira is a slight favorite now. She opened as a much bigger favorite. I believe it was around minus 200. Steady money though is coming in on Rendon recently, mainly because of the spotty record of Pereira. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's horrible, right? There's a couple illegitimate fights. Got flagged for I believe it was either rigging of the fight or just like there's not enough evidence to even consider it a real fight, which is obviously concerning when you have a young 19-year-old prospect going up against a UFC vet at this point. Despite Rendon not having as many professional fights as you would expect a 36-year-old UFC veteran, but she does have decent skills. She's not a finisher in any chance, which should benefit Pereira, right? Rendon has actually zero finishes on her record, all six wins by decision. But I see a lot of people Rendon, but I'm actually going to go the other way. I'm going to pick Pereira to win this fight by decision. Mainly one, obviously, I said this before, but the danger factor of Rendon non-existent. Pereira should have a pretty big striking gap, in my opinion, and even the performances in the UFC from Rendon aren't even that impressive, in my opinion, because going to a split decision with Tamaris Vidal. I know she's a big underdog in that fight, but Tavares Vidal, like, not to sugarcoat it, she sucks. Like, she sucks bad. And in the fight after, even when securing 3 takedowns, she still lost that fight to Daria Zalesnyakova, which she might have had a case of winning that fight, but still, the striking, she looked a little bit stiff in the striking, and I think if Pereira can kind of keep the range, even if she's working on her takedown defense a little bit, I think it should be enough to at least scramble with Rendon, get back to her feet. She should have a big advantage on the feet. But again, like I said, the record is very concerning, right? 2 illegitimate fights, it's a bunch of cans to be honest. So picking Pereira, but not crazy confident. Age, experience, all that stuff. All right, next fight coming up at flyweight, we got Alessandro Costa taking on another short notice UFC debut, Alden Correa. Correa, if you haven't seen him before, he is mainly a striker. Pretty tall as shown, pretty tall for this division. He's got a whopping height advantage in this fight. Likes to keep the range, work in, but then eventually work inside. Uses the boxing pretty well. We'll set up sometimes, occasionally, some pretty spinning attacks, pretty kicks, but does like to box a lot. We'll sometimes transition to wrestling. He doesn't really have traditional takedowns. We'll kind of more so just kind of reach over, try to grab a leg, and then work you down from there. Good top control, decent submissions. He's pretty good overall. I do like this signing, but he is running into a bit of a bad matchup. And as you see from the odds, that also reflects it. Costa coming in at minus 430, and I think it's correct, right? Despite the pretty long layoff length, a very long layoff actually, he hasn't fought in over a year, maybe even two, I believe. But Costa should have all the tools necessary to win this fight. I know he has a big height advantage. Even the reach is identical in this fight. And again, he does have that one punch knockout power, which is a commodity at flyweight. I think he could be able to use it to great effect here, right? We've seen Korea. He doesn't wrestle as much as he should, in my opinion, especially in this fight too, where I do think he's going to be at a big speed and a power disadvantage. Obviously Costa has had durability issues on his part, but I think everything should be there for him to win by knockout here. So give me Costa by knockout. A lot of people saying these minus 430 odds are a little bit wild, but I do think they are correct in this case. All right, moving on to the middleweight. We got the two best middleweight. Actually, that's not true. There's a worse middleweight matchup coming up, but this is probably the second worst they could have made. Zach Reese versus Cedric Dumas. Reese is minus 240. Dumas is at plus 205. I'm seeing real people, and this is not joking. I'm seeing real people. This line on Zach Reese has moved down a lot as of recently. He was as low as minus 205. So there are people that are looking at their money and going, I should bet on Cedric Dumas to win a UFC fight, which I just it's insane to me because this guy, at first he was kind of evolving into someone decent, but I mean, you look at the performances now in his personal. I have to mention his personal life because it feels like it's getting in the way of training, right? He, he's been arrested 12 times. And as of recently, he literally got his last fight canceled because he couldn't get his ankle bracelet off. And I am not kidding when I say that. So, this guy was evolving, but in his last couple of fights, he's just shown he's got no heart. He's got, poor striking defense, sitting at under 50% right now. And when he's facing another powerful guy like Reese, he's going to get probably chinned at some point, and I feel like it's just bound to happen. I'm not high on Reese either. He's had a couple bad knockouts in the UFC against, one of the guys I don't really think is UFC caliber, but this is a tailor-made matchup for him. He should have advantages everywhere, especially in the jiu-jitsu realm, which, usually I'm a bit concerned about him just laying down there, but he should be fine in this fight. Dumas is the most dangerous, powerful guy in the world, and I think this should be a pretty easy night at the office for Reese. I'm surprised these odds are at minus 240. They should be a lot higher, in my opinion, even for a guy as, not great as Reese is. So give me Reese by knockout in this fight. Pretty cut and dry. All right, moving on to flyweight. A little bit more of an interesting matchup. We got Jesus Aguilar versus Luis Gurul. Gurul, the big favorite here in this fight. A little bit surprising, in my opinion. Hasn't yet won a fight in the UFC. Coming off the knockout loss to Ode Osborne. Aguilar also coming off a loss, that time to Rafael Estevam. Tried the guillotine, could not get the guillotine. Tried it in the third round, which is, very low IQ in my opinion. Honestly got a path to winning that fight. Estevam was very gassed in that fight. Believe he missed weight in that fight as well. So, there was an opportunity there for Aguilar, but obviously could not get it done. And this is another poor matchup for him because Gurul is going to be at a significant striking advantage, in my opinion. People were saying, "Oh, he got knocked out by Ode Osborne. This guy's a fraud." Well, Ode Osborne's a very, very difficult debut. I know people look at his 13-9 record and think he's not very good. He is very, very good. And that's pretty much a nightmare matchup for him. But in this fight, he's going to have a speed and a power advantage on the feet here, and just overall striking technique is going to be at advantage because Aguilar, as you know, a very wild guy on the feet, loves to just swing from the hip, and I don't think it's going to work in this fight. And as long as Gurul is minding his cues, P's and Q's on the ground, especially like I say, the guillotine, it's going to be there. He's going to try to go for it at some point in this fight, and if he gets him with it, I won't be surprised. But I do think Gurul is good enough on the ground to kind of avoid that danger and kind of take over as the fight goes later on in this fight. So give me Gurul to win this fight by decision. Not loving it, but I'm more confident than most people are in his ability to kind of win the striking exchanges in this fight. All right, moving on to a pretty big matchup at strawweight, despite the low card placement. Tatiana Suarez taking on Amanda Lemos. Suarez big favorite in this fight, and I don't love it, to be honest with you. I'm gonna pick her, but I don't love it because she kind of got bullied by Zhang Weili in that fight. She showed that if that first game plan doesn't work of just wrestling and trying for the top control, she has nothing. She has no striking to back it up, right? We saw after the first round the takedowns weren't working, and she didn't have a backup plan. She was getting outstruck very big in that fight, right? She gave up a 10-8, I believe, at one point in that fight. And it just showed she didn't, like I said, she didn't have a backup plan in that fight. And, if it doesn't work against Amanda Lemos here, she's not going to have a backup plan again. And she's going to get outstruck again, maybe even knocked out. Because we've seen Lemos has one of the biggest, power in this weight class. But what I do like from Suarez is the top control and even the danger on top, right? Because we've seen Lemos get out grappled at some points in her UFC career. The takedown defense is a little bit better, but the real concern for her is on the bottom, where she's shown, an ability to kind of get caught in scrambles, to get submitted, have her back taken, and I honestly think that's what's gonna happen again here. I do like Suarez in this matchup. Again, don't love it because she showed didn't have a backup plan in her last fight, but I do think this is a lot more favorable than Zhang Weili. So, give me Suarez to win this fight by submission here early. All right, moving on, lightweight division, we got Claudio Puelles taking on Joaquim Silva. Odds dead even in this fight, both at minus 110, and I don't get it, to be frank with you. I don't get how people are betting on Claudio Puelles, especially after Paul Craig. Claudio Puelles is a guy that just hasn't really evolved, in my opinion. He shot takedowns before, but they're not great. And people are saying, oh, he shot takedowns against Faresiyama. It was a split decision. It was not a split decision. If you watch that fight, that was not something that should have been a split decision. That was just a bad judge, being blind for that night. Maybe misplaced contact or something. But, I like Joaquim Silva in this fight, right? The only concern maybe is a takedown defense sitting at around 50%, which isn't great. But yeah, I like him in this fight. Puelles, can't really offer any threats that Silva has been, he has been chinned in the past before, but that's not going to be a problem in this fight. I can assure you that. And, on the feet, he does have a lot of power. And that's one thing that Puelles has not responded to well in his UFC run is the power coming back his way. And I think Silva can really land something on him that's going to hurt him bad. And, as the takedowns don't work, this guy's going to get desperate, go for the leg locks, which aren't going to work because Silva's a high-level grappler. And I just think he's going to be lost out there again. So I think Silva's going to win the fight by knockout. Not necessarily like a clean knockout. I think it's just going to be, continuous damage over time. And Puelles just is not going to be able to find that submission. Going to be lost out there. Give me Silva by knockout. All right, moving on. Featured prelim. Don't ask me why that's the featured prelim. This is the best fight of this. This is a horrible fight. Probably the two worst people in the UFC. We got Jose Daniel Medina versus Dushko Todorovic. Todorovic, big favor, and I get it, right? There's not too much going on in this fight, right? Medina, good at one thing, and he's good at taking damage, and that's about it, all he's good at doing, right? This guy listed as a boxer doesn't really do anything well, though, right? The takedown defense is atrocious. This guy gets hit almost as much as the opponent wants him to. You throw a punch at this guy, it's almost guaranteed he's going to get hit. And, we saw in his last fight, you can't just chin bully your way into everything, right? He got knocked out in about a minute in that fight by Teba Gautier, and I think the same thing's going to happen here, right? Todorovic, obviously, way past his prime. He's getting knocked out a couple times recently, but the threats are still there. He does kind of come forward in these car crash situations and will always give himself a chance. And it's going to work beautifully in this fight because Medina doesn't really do anything well. He doesn't really pose any danger on the feet. And I think Todorovic can kind of come through here and just kind of bully him, maybe even take this fight down, look for submission. He does have that tricky jiu-jitsu game on the bottom, but yeah, pretty simple pick, picking Todorovic to win by knockout. Nothing should surprise you about that. All right, main card time. Move on to bantamweight. This is a lot better fight. We got Santiago Luna, another short notice UFC debut here, taking on Kang Lee, and he's listed at minus 135. Luna is, and that's this guy's actually looked very impressive despite the cloudy 6-0 record. You think this guy's just been running through people, but he's actually putting up some pretty good fights on the regional scene. Been in a lot of wars, which, kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, he's showing that toughness, that grit at only 21, mind you. On the other hand, the guys he's facing aren't the best if they're the regional, and he's still going to war with these guys. So a little bit of a concern there, but what I've seen from him, it looks pretty good. The striking, very dangerous striking, big power, and he comes from a Greco-Roman wrestling background. We haven't really seen that too much on the tape, but I promise you it's there, and he might even be able to use it in this fight against King Lee, who has himself gone back to the wrestling a little bit more in his recent fights. Absolutely smoked Gaston Bolaños in his last fight, which is a good look for him. He was coming in as a tiny underdog, but he definitely blew through him, and listen, this is a tough matchup for Lee. I was kind of tempted to pick him, mainly due to the both experience edge and just the overall UFC edge. He's fought some of the better guys in this division, fought Zhang Lao or Long Zhao and Chris Gutierrez, but I am going to side with Luna in this fight, mainly because we've seen the dog in him. We've seen the striking and the wrestling. I think he can do it all. He's more than happy to get into some scrambles with this guy, King Lee. And I think he can even come out on top in some of them. And yeah, I love this kid's attitude. Again, only 21, a little bit of a concern, but at the same time, youth is definitely going to be on his side in this fight. Give me Luna to win by a close decision. All right, moving on another interesting fight. This was also one of the newer fights added, but it was both these guys coming in on a relative short notice. Alexander Hernandez taking on Carlos Diego Fajeda. Fajeda has flipped to a favorite, was originally a big underdog in this spot. He's now minus 120. Hernandez, the even odds underdog. Listen, myself, I'm kind of surprised Hernandez is the underdog because he's got all this momentum going behind him right now. Coming off the big knockout win over Chase Hooper, big underdog in that fight as well, and kind of found him footing a little bit in the UFC despite the rocky start. Kind of picked up some good wins over some decent comp, and now finds himself on the border of a top 15 fight. And if there's one guy to beat to get in top 15, it's definitely this guy, Fajeda. He's been in the top 15 for a little bit, not right in there right now, but he's fought some of the best guys in the division. Coming off the loss to Grant Dawson, where he had success in that fight. Despite the early kind of smudging, he did kind of come out hot in those final two rounds. Wasn't able to find a finish there, but did showcase the heart that he's known for and the high level grappling that he's shown in the past. And I think this is a good spot for Diego Fajeda, right? People are, the line started at big favorite money for Hernandez. I understand the odds coming back, despite thinking that Hernandez maybe should be a favorite, but I am going to pick Fajeda in this fight. Again, I do like the power. I like the fact that he's so well rounded. Hernandez hasn't really fought a guy like that in a while. I know the Hooper win was big, but Hooper was just kind of coming forward, shit in the air in that fight. Looking back at it, it probably wasn't the best win, in my opinion. I think Fajeda's just gonna kind of be a little bit better everywhere, despite the age gap. I like him to win this fight by decision, but a finish definitely isn't on the table considering Hernandez is kind of showing an ability to get finished in these fights, kind of phase himself out of these situations. All right, moving on to a middleweight fight. We got Kelvin Gastelum taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. Gastelum at minus 230 and Stoltzfus is in at plus 195. And I'll be honest, I was kind of tempted to pick Stoltzfus in this fight. Gastelum, he's obviously just not taking his career seriously at this point. Tried to cut back down to welterweight for Sean Brady, got smoked. They're like, oh, okay, let's give you Daniel Rodriguez at welterweight. Didn't make the welterweight limit, had to go to middleweight, and is now just at middleweight. So obviously, the dude isn't taking his career seriously. Look at the bill; he looks like a refrigerator. And like I said, tempted to pick Stoltzfus. The dude has power in his hands. Very, very willing to trade with anyone. And I think he's going to have a big power advantage in this fight. I don't really see him. He's had chin issues in the past, but I don't think he's going to get finished by Kelvin Gastelum. And, he's been very relentless wrestling in the past. And, while it's not as good as Sean Brady's, it's definitely, there, especially the size advantage he's going to carry in this fight. So, with all that being said, I do think Gastelum obviously does still have those skills. I'm going to pick him to win this fight. But not loving it, to be honest. Been dropped a bunch in his last couple fights. Got knocked down 3 times his last fight. And honestly, I don't feel good about this fight for either guy, to be honest. Both Stoltzfus, the durability issues, fought a good fight against Ruziboya, but still durability issues, and the Gastelum issues just speak for itself. Like, even look at him. But I'm picking Gastelum to win the fight by. I mean, obviously, not as bad as me, but I'm picking Gastelum to win the fight by decision. Don't love it. Should be more of an even odds kind of fight. All right, moving on. Feature fight at lightweight. Rafa Garcia taking on Jared Gordon. Gordon listed at a pretty big favorite, minus 230. I'm surprised these odds are not higher. Listen, Rafa Garcia has some skills, right? This guy's a good striker. Can kind of scramble on the ground, can find submissions, but the guy has no danger whatsoever. The guy's not dangerous at all. Got finished by Grant Dawson of all people, which, as good as Grant Dawson is, he's more of a wet blanket than a finisher type of guy. But, as we've seen from Garcia, he's not a finisher. He can't win a close decision with, 42-year-old Vince Pichel. And, it's going to be a problem for him against Gordon, who's kind of peaking at, a little bit later in his career, right? You've seen, maybe early on in his career, he's having chin issues, kind of, having trouble with the durability. But late in his career, he's been turning on. I mean, he's fighting some really, really good fights against some really good people. Flatline Moises in his last fight. And honestly, probably should have beat Hackparast, probably should have beat Pimblett. And those are two wins that are aging very, very well for him. And, I think in this fight, he's just going to hold advantages everywhere, right? The striking and the power should be there. I honestly think he's going to find a knockout in this fight. But if not, he has the wrestling chops, right? He hasn't really used them as much in his last couple fights because he hasn't needed to. But if it is there and if he wants to, he can definitely take down Rafa Garcia at will here. And Garcia has just got, bitched by Grant Dawson, who's not as good as, or is a lot better than Gordon. But I do think Gordon can maintain a lot of those advantages still on the ground. And I do think eventually, one way or another, it's going to lead to a knockout finish. So give me Gordon to win this fight by knockout. One of the more confident picks I have on this card. All right, co-main event time. This short notice opportunity for David Martinez, the young prospect from Mexico. Big opportunity for him against the number 9 ranked Rob Font, who's sitting at a slight favorite right now. And that's mainly because of his recent performance being pretty good against some, formerly hyped up kind of guys. I know Phillips wasn't really the guy we thought he was. Kind of got smoked by Oliveira as well, but Oliveira's good too. David Martinez, this guy is really, really good. If you haven't, followed my Twitter account for a while, he was one of the guys coming out of last year's season of the Contender Series. I was one of the highest on. This guy is a really nasty striker. Can keep the range really well, really bouncy on his feet, moves in and out of the range well. Lots of power though. We saw in that Simon Oliveira fight. I know Simon Oliveira kind of sucks, but he did what he needed to do against the guy that's below him, right? He bitched him, to be honest with you, and I think that's what he should have done to him, and he definitely did that. And despite the tough matchup for Martinez here, right? We know Rob Font is a good striker. He is still pretty fast for his age, right? He does still have a crazy durability for his age. I don't think Martinez is necessarily going to get him out of there. But I do think he can keep the range a lot better than Font in this fight, despite the pretty big reach disadvantage. I think he can keep the range of those kicks, right? Font, mainly a boxer. And even David Martinez maybe kind of mix in a couple takedowns, kind of keep him guessing, and then he can unleash those kicks and maybe those punches later. But I am going to pick Martinez here mainly off of just speed, age, all that sort of thing. And I think he's the real deal, right? I would have picked Font against Rosas. It's a little bit different of a fight. But I'm going to go Martinez here. Again, like I said, the age, the speed, and the overall dynamicism of his striking, I think is going to get the job done by decision here. All right, moving on. Featherweight main event. This is a pretty good one. We got Diego Lopes taking on John Silva. Silva right now at minus 230. Diego Lopes coming back at plus 205. And I get the odds, to be honest. Look, I know Lopes, has the kind of high level experience that Silva doesn't have. But if you dissect some of these people he's fighting, it's not far off from Silva. Right? I know people want to say, oh, Silva beat, a bantamweight, he beat Bryce Mitchell. That's, not aging well. Drew Dober was washed, and, Melsick only has a couple wins in the UFC. But if you really look closer, those are good wins, right? Drew Dober up a weight class just a week or 2 weeks after he beat Charles Jourdain. That's a very good win. He dominated him. Look, Melsick, despite the poor UFC record, very high level striker, and he dealt with him very quickly. Bryce Mitchell, that was supposed to be, the kryptonite of his game. We don't know what his takedown defense is like. Defended over 10 takedowns in that fight and submitted Bryce Mitchell. So, look, I love this guy, Gene Silva's game, patient striking. I think it's going to work perfectly against Lopes, who, on his side, his wins are kind of overrated in my opinion. I know he lost to Volk, and Volk is still amazing, but Brian Ortega, as we've seen now, not the same guy. 4 hours notice, Dan Ige, that is what it is, not his fault. Sadiq Youssef just came off a beating against Edson Barbosa. So I just don't think the wins are that good for Diego Lopes, in my opinion. This is a horrible matchup for him. I know he can wrestle somewhat, but I don't think the wrestling is very good on his side. And in terms, I think it's gonna be mainly a striking match. Silva literally attempts more takedowns has a more takedowns attempted per 15 minutes than Diego Lopes. So I think it's going to be mainly striking match. And on the feet, the speed should be on Gene Silva's side, right? The ability to see the strikes coming back his way. Diego Lopes, the head does not move side to side; it goes straight back and forth, and that's going to be a gift for Gene Silva. He's going to land that power early in this fight, I think. And while Lopes gets frustrated, Silva's going to be bounce it out of range, try and, pretty strikes on Lopes. It's going to frustrate him. He's going to come in and get countered hard here in this fight, in my opinion. So I definitely get people who are on Lopes, right? He does have crazy durability and power of his own, right? If he is able to pressure Silva against the cage, land something, I wouldn't be crazy surprised. But, I do like this is a very, very good matchup for Gene Silva in this fight. Again, all the respect to Lopes. I love the guy, but he's walking right into a freaking death trap here in this fight. Give me Silva. I think he actually knocks him out maybe third, second round in this fight as Lopes is having trouble landing these strikes. So give me Silva by knockout, and that is the end of the breakdown. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Plan on doing something a little bit different next week since we got no fights. But yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys stay blessed.